why isn't the Apocrypha in our Bibles today? Well, the Apocrypha is literally a word that means the concealing, and it was a collection of books that were written between the Testaments. That would be between 400 BC and the coming of Christ in around 4 BC to, 1 to 33 AD. Between the writings of Matthew and Malachi, these books were written by the Jews historically as essentially fictional narratives, what we would call fan fiction in our modern day. And they would be included among the names of 1st and 2nd Esdras, the 5 books of Enoch, 1st and 2nd Maccabees, Tobit, the Wisdom of Solomon, Ecclesiasticus, and as well additional chapters to Daniel and Esther, among other smaller books. But these books are what we would call today these fictional writings that were done by Jews, and much like the book of Jasher that we've referenced previously, were never intended to be taken as scripture, as inspired words of God by the Jews who originally wrote them. Thus, A, they didn't recognize them, and B, we shouldn't either. Likewise, there is a standard by which we decide what is in the Bible and what isn't. And while, say for example, some of these books contain legitimate history, if you want to learn about the origins of Hanukkah, for example, the book of 1st Maccabees would be a good narrative to read. Unfortunately, it also includes some glaring historical errors, and that is one of the standards by which we do not include something in our Bibles. For example, in the case of this video, to keep it short, I'll mention that it causes a lot of concern for biblical scholars in that it calls the king, Nebuchadnezzar, during the time of Daniel, as well as Jeremiah, the king of Assyria. For those of you who don't know, Nebuchadnezzar was not the king of Assyria. He conquered the Assyrians, but he was the king of Babylon, and that's ultimately where his nationality and loyalty lied. So when we look at this book and it contains a straight up historical blunder, would we expect that from God? Well, the answer to that is no, and in fact that is one of the standards by which we judge whether a book belongs in the Bible or not. In the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 18, verse 20, the standard of a true prophet, which is a word meaning a spokesman, by the way, someone who's speaking on behalf of another, and in this case, God, was to be held to this standard. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, which I have not commanded him to speak, or who speaks in the names of other gods, that prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how shall we know the word which the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the thing does not happen or come to pass, that is the thing which the Lord has not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously, you shall not be afraid of him. The point is laying down the standard of Moses, who in verse 18 is laid out as the first prophet of God. And not only was Moses an individual who was reporting first-hand eyewitness information, what he didn't see, recorded in the book of Genesis, he was taking from the eyewitness, God himself. But going on from the Exodus and on to Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, these were things that he saw and bore witness to firsthand, or got from the eyewitnesses themselves, i.e. his birth. That would have to fall in line with the eyewitness accounts of Aaron and Miriam, his older siblings. Likewise, when Moses spoke these words, he also held himself to these standards in that he didn't speak of any other God but the true God. He didn't contradict the message as far as what kind of God was speaking through him. And this message remained consistent throughout the Old and New Testaments. The same God that spoke to Moses was the same God revealing himself in human flesh in the person of Jesus Christ, and who was speaking through his apostles. Thirdly, not only do we need an eyewitness, not only do we need consistency in those doctrines, but we also need accuracy. God's not going to make mistakes. And while a copyist error is different, we need to look at the solid facts. And these books contain factual, doctrinal, and overall just conceptual errors as far as how they represent the nature and character of God. And that is not a capital offense to the Jews who wrote them, because they weren't claiming to speak from God. And of course, as far as a last and final note for future benefit, what else was required to confirm someone as truly speaking from God? Well, that would of course be the confirmation of miracles. If God is speaking through someone, he can back up his words with actions. and with every prophet that includes their words in our Bibles today, we held them to these 4 standards. That is not to be said as far as the same in the Apocrypha, and while, as well-intentioned as it may be, the Catholics who include this in their Bibles want to read these books, I think there is no harm in that as long as you understand that there is a difference between God's inspired word and these writings that were treated by the original authors as fictional. If you have any further questions about the Apocrypha or the books that we mentioned or the standard that was given, leave them in the comments below. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to answering more of your questions very soon.